Hello and welcome to another episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon. Although this is not going to be released on May the 4th, since we are recording it on May the 4th, in honor of Star Wars, May the 4th be with you, we are going to be discussing good dialogue versus bad dialogue, good accents versus bad accents, and we're going to draw from all kinds of examples, but many of them are going to come from Star Wars.
Yeah, I thought it was funny that you started this off with "in honor of," because I was like, wait a minute, I plan on ripping the crap out of it. So, is it really an honor?
There are good lines. There are
There
good
are.
lines.
There are some great lines.
Yeah. Before we jump into it, my name is Marie Mullaney. I am a fantasy world building YouTuber with a epic fantasy novel series. And with me, as always, is my co-host Drake.
I'm Max Alexander Drake, award-winning novelist, game writer, worked in pretty much every medium, teach writing all over the world. Welcome.
If you like what we do here, hit the subscribe button, the like button, the share button, all the buttons. Make all the buttons light up so the algorithm knows that people like us and that we get shared far and wide. Okay, so let's jump into dialogue. So let's start with what line of dialogue really sticks with you? What do you think is a really great line?
There's so well. I mean, were we just talking about movies, or are we just talking about like
Books, movies, like what off the top of your head? If somebody were to ask you for the top 3 lines of dialogue,
and most of it's probably going to come from movies. I mean, I don't have a lot of dialogue from books that really stick with me, except for, and we've already talked about some of these, like Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett have written some really memorable lines. We talked about, the Vogon spaceship floated in the air exactly the way bricks don't.
yeah,
Like that's just a
but
great
that's
line.
prose. That's prose, to be fair. Like specifically,
Oh, that's true. That is not even dialogue.
Yeah.
So pretty much most of it is going to be movies. I think movies, because I am dyslexic and because I am very visual, I don't see words in my head. So that might be another reason why a lot of things don't stick with me in from the thousands of books that I've read, but there are those movie lines that really do stick with me, and like some of them are kind of obnoxious, and they either are not obnoxious, not well known. There's a word for that. I'm a writer, and it's not obscure. I don't know where I got obnoxious from. Some of them are obscure and nobody really knows why. I mean, they just worked their way into my thing. So like one of the things, if somebody says anything about me, whatever, being late or missing something or whatever, I will do a line from 48 hours that almost nobody remembers even exists. But it's a line, I've been busy. And it doesn't mean anything to most people, but like there's this scene in 48 hours where this guy was in prison for 10 years and he put his car in storage, like just short-term storage. So it's there for 10 years when it really shouldn't have been. So when he goes to pick it up, the guy's like, wow, it's been here for 10 years. And he goes, I've been busy. Like, I don't know why it stuck with me, but I really love that line. A lot of lines from Hudson Hawk that I will quote all the time. The Princess Bride, Stardust. When we turn into Star Wars, there's a lot obviously there.
From Star Wars, my favorite line of dialogue probably remains, it's a little cheesy, but I love it. Do or do not, there is no try. I mean,
Yep.
It was golden. It was a golden, beautiful line of dialogue.
Me and my wife have this on t-shirts, but one of my favorite lines is, I love you. I know.
Yeah.
And so I've got a picture, I've got one with Han Solo and it just says, I know. And she's got a picture with Leia and it says, I love you.
Yeah. And they call back on that, and the reverse of that in the third movie was equal. Like it was,
yeah,
that particular exchange was beautiful. And then from a book perspective, I do have to say that our good friend Gandalf's "You shall not pass," I mean, is extremely iconic. And yes, I know the movies have also made it iconic, but it is in the book as well.
I don't know. I mean, without the movies, I don't think that line stuck out to me. It was Ewan McGregor,
Fly,
right?
you fools.
Right. Yeah. Although my son sent me that scene yesterday that somebody has digitally edited. And so the Balrog is there and Gandalf is there and he says, "You shall not pass." And he slams his staff down. But then they froze the Balrog side. So just this little piece under Gandalf breaks free and he falls through. And they're watching him and he only falls for a little bit. And then you hear, and everybody's like, and the Balrog's still just standing there. So
it has, of course, spanned a million parodies, like Gandalf becoming the headmaster of Hogwarts and saying, "You shall not pass."
Yep. Yeah. So he just sent me that yesterday. So that was quite entertaining.
Yeah.
Especially the look on Frodo's face, because in that scene he's like horrified.
Yeah.
But when you now match that with, he just fell 100 feet and died.
Yeah.
And actually didn't stop the Balrog. It tickled me. It did tickle me.
But yeah,
I mean, there is a lot. I think there's more horrible dialogue in Star Wars than good. I don't know if there's any great lines, although we talked about one before the show that I don't know. I thought it was a really good line. I don't remember it from the movies, but when you said it, I was like, wow, that's actually deep.
So Anakin says it to Padme, and it's the line, "I am haunted by the kiss you should never have given me."
And again, I don't know the scene. I mean, Anakin's lines were so bad in that movie. They were so on the nose and written by a 2-year-old that maybe that's why it sticks out at you at being so bad, because you have all these, "Hey, the walls hold up the roof. Hey, I drink water when I'm thirsty. Hey, I can't see in the dark." Like, they literally, that was the line, that was his entire dialogue for the entire couple of movies that he was in. And it was just like, oh my God, is this written by a 2-year-old?
I know people blame what's the actor's name, Hayden Christensen, but honestly, I don't think Anthony Hopkins could have made anything with it. Those lines were
the only thing
horrifying.
Isn't it Sir Anthony Hopkins now, I think? But the only thing that could have been different is, I think Anakin Hopkins would have gone, I'm not reading this.
Yeah.
This is bad.
This is bad.
I'm not doing it.
Like, he might have been able to force, but I mean, Hayden was a relatively unknown actor. I mean, there was no way he could have forced the change.
Well,
you know what I mean?
I mean, if I'm an up and coming actor and I get a big role and I can obviously tell that it's going to tank my career, I'm going to be like, I'm sorry, guys. I'm not, like, this is bad.
It depends. Like, it depends on how much money you're getting for those 3 movies.
True.
You know what I mean? If it's enough that it's not going to matter.
True. I mean, if you look up in the Webster's Dictionary the definition of horror, you will see a picture of, or pretty much any writer or any actor's face. So yeah, I'll give you that.
But the simple fact is that the dialogue in those movies. So one of the best examples of really bad dialogue lines in those movies is in The Phantom Menace. Those 2 freaking aliens are discussing this whole situation with, like, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan have just escaped. "You didn't tell him about the missing Jedi," says Rune Harkle in English. Yeah. Then comes Newt Gunray's response: "No need to report that until we have something to report." Now, I'm sure that the writer of that line thought that repeating "report" reinforces it in that sentence, but it doesn't. It just echoes. Also, the dialogue is so on the nose. It is so extremely on the nose there. Everybody could just hear the report that they gave to the Senator Palpatine, where they had not included like, hello, did we need that? Did we need that?
The only reason why I would add a line like that is if I've got payoff, and there's no payoff to his response. So there's 2 ways that you could get a little bit. The smaller of the 2 ways that I can think of right off the top of my head is a little subtext where it's like, "You didn't tell him about the Jedi," and he goes, "No."
Yeah.
And then let the audience go, "Oh." Or if you want to be a little more heavy-handed and also make it kind of a joke, he goes, "Oh yeah, why don't you go ahead and tell him that?" And then he tells him, and he gets force choked and killed. And he's like, "That's why I didn't tell." I mean, he wouldn't say this, but he's like, "Yeah," and he just walks away. Of course, that writer would write, and that's why I didn't tell him, because I knew I would get force choked to death. Like, of course, he'd have to say that.
But
So I'm
that
surprised
also,
he didn't come up with the beautiful Anakin Skywalker line where he says, "I don't like sand," and that's bad enough until you add the next line to the which he's like, "It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Walls hold up the roof. We breathe air. The sun is in the sky."
oh man, that line is so bad. It is, but that has become such a meme. It's just,
but his whole character, I mean,
oh,
the scene, and I don't have it up, I didn't pull it up,
yeah.
but the scene where he is talking to Padme, I think they're in their apartment, if I remember correctly. It's I've had a lot of therapy to get rid of all this horrid writing since then. But he's like, "Let me tell you exactly how I feel about you in every single way, with every single word that I say, without any subtext whatsoever, to make sure that you 100% know exactly how I feel right now and in the future, and when I met you, and here it is, and blah." And I think that might be where the line comes from. Is that the scene where the line comes from that we talked about earlier?
No, that's not where the haunted by your kiss comes from.
No.
Yeah, that's a little bit earlier. That's where they are on that other planet where he shows off his force powers by lifting a fruit to her, and oh my God, oh man.
No.
Anyway, that sand line is just, it's atrocious. But the other thing that really got to me about the episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars is the use of alien accents. In episode 4, 5, and 6, Yoda is the one who speaks with an accent, but he is the only one of his species. Okay, so he is never speaking his native language. So it makes sense that he is always speaking in an accent that is probably like native to his species, right? And if anybody wonders where I get my inspiration for fleets from, I have a goddamn cat. Shush. And so his accent really works. Also, it's a well worked out accent that works very well.
Mm-hmm.
But in that scene that I just mentioned with the report and the dude, talking to the senator about what's going on, etc., etc., those guys are both from the same species. And yet they speak with an accent. Like, would they not be speaking to each other
In their own language?
their own language, which would therefore be accentless English?
Okay, interesting. Never thought about it like that. I mean, my knee jerk is to just let them speak in their own language. But then again, I'm a prose writer, so it'd be very prose heavy, and there'd be the prose character, the narrating character would be there, and he wouldn't understand them, or she. And that would be a plot point for that. Like, there'd be something that I'd be doing.
This is obviously on TV. So
I guess the only example that I can give is, so in the Genesis saga, we have the Elmeranthians who, when they are speaking English or common, the thing that I have them do is, they're, first of all, they're very formal in their speaking, but then they always every sentence either just it ends with a hum, or it ends with a yes, and it depends on the structure of the sentence, because they don't really, that's kind of how their language works, and so it's not there. Now, later in the book, they speak to each other in their language all the time. And how I got around that, the plot device that I used, is the narrating character has a magical necklace that they don't know about that translates their words into his head. And so I just write it in English. I use a different font, so it's kind of a scripting font. But they don't say hum or yes in their language. They only do that when they're speaking
So that's my point. Like I have when Naira and her husbands come to the empire, right? They speak their own language, and when they speak their own language, they are fluent. They make no grammatical mistakes. They obviously speak to each other very fluently. When they speak to the people from the empire, speaking a language they're not familiar with, they do make grammatical mistakes. They do flip words. They don't always use contractions, etc., to indicate that they are not proficient with that language. But
Right.
when I then have them speaking their own language, they speak smoothly.
But you're still writing that in English.
Yes, but that of course it's all English. But it annoys me that the pack dialogue, when they're speaking to each other in presumably their own language, is not perfect English.
Do you do anything? And I already know the answers, but do you do anything to separate when they're speaking their own language visually for the audience versus?
I don't, but I do in the scenes tend to say, he said in temple tongue, or she switched to temple tongue, or whatever, so that they understand that there's been a switch now.
Right. And I knew you did that. And that's actually very common. That's actually a really good way to do that because of the fact that it lets the audience know this and it doesn't bog them down. It is the reason why I chose to write in a scripted font for their language, so that I didn't, because I don't use speech tags.
I considered the font. The reason why I didn't go that way is because of reflowable text. Yep. Because in EPUB, in ebook format, you have no control over the font. So
you have very, 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 very little control of the font. Yeah. It caused nightmares. And the publisher couldn't do it. I eventually did it myself. I actually had to really research heavily. But when you get, I mean, they're all out of print now, but they'll be back in print before the end of the year, the new version. Yeah. Wow. But it doesn't have any of that. Oh, wait, no, it does. It is in the first book. Sorry. So when the book comes out later this year, you'll be able to see it. There is a way to manhandle the behind the scenes code of EPUB and force it to give you the scripted fonts. But the audience can still change it.
Yes, that's what I was about to say. Right. Yes, you can, but the audience can still change it.
Yeah, which is a shame. Now, you can get around it. The one way that you 100% get around is you can turn it into a JPEG, but then that kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
Especially if they're reading on a very tiny device, like a very small phone, then it's going to be very, very, very tiny. Trust me, I went through all sorts of rigmarole to try and make that work. And it's been so many years, I don't remember how I did it. So I guess I'm gonna have to go down that journey again to figure all this stuff out. But now I actually know a really good programmer who is brilliant at that stuff. So maybe I'll tap her on the shoulder, see if I can get a little help.
So yes, I have a problem with that line of dialogue in freaking Star Wars, because they shouldn't have an accent when they're talking to each other in their native language. It's like a universal translator. Right. So I read an unpublished work recently that made me kind of throw up my hands a little bit, because it had a universal translator in it. And the reason it really, it tickled me the wrong way and was because every person in the scene was speaking perfect English, except one dude. One dude was speaking with what I would call a heavy African accent, as understood by an American. So probably kind of Nigerian-ish accent, if I was to put a finger on it. Then it comes out that there's a universal translator in action. Which means what? The universal translator can translate Japanese to perfect English. But an African language comes out with an accent?
Yeah, but that's why
it griped me.
I still like having everyone just have the accent.
But that's an accent on a language. That's fine. Right? That's an accent on a language.
That's regional. Fine. That's dialect. That's really
regional dialect language. That's 100%.
Everybody speaks common. All the humans speak common, and then the Almorantians do have their own language. The Momokians have their own language. The Torajan do not have their own language. They also speak common, and then there's some other races that have their own different things, but they're peripheral to the story. They're just in the world.
So in the Empire, I have regional variations on the language, right? And people speak with regional accents and so on. And that is fine. Like, I can get behind that, no problem. My problem is, if you're making it an accent caused by the fact that this is a language foreign to me, if I am then speaking to my countrymen or my species mate, and we're speaking the language that is native to us, there should be no accent. There should be no struggling with the language. It is our language.
There should be no struggling with the language. I agree with that. I mean, like, Germans still have a German accent when they're speaking in German, and French still have a French accent when they're speaking in French.
But to another German, it sounds like German.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, you understand what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, that's what I said. It's a weird. I'm not necessarily going against you on this. I'm just, it's. I can see an argument for doing it.
No, only if the dude, only if you're reading or you're hearing it in that language. But they weren't.
That's what I'm saying. Like I said, I can see some arguments for doing it. You just have to be consistent. The way you were talking about with the one person through a translator being accented and no one else, that's not consistent, and therefore that's going to cause grief. But I can see not arguments for it, but ways to approach it where you'd want to do it that way, or at least make the decision to do it that way. That's the problem with writing. It's subjective.
Yeah. So
you have to make the decision, and then you have to test it out and see if people other than you actually like it. Because just because you like something doesn't mean it's the right thing for your audience. I mean, that happens to me all the time, where I'll think I have, got the cat's meow, put it out there, and everyone's like, this is terrible. And I'm like, oh, well, then I'm not going to do that. Like, I thought it was awesome, but I'm not the one buying the book. So, I'll just do it a different way. And I think a lot of writers have a problem with that. They're like, well, it's my way. I'm the writer. I do what I want. It's mine. I'm like, well, then you're buying it too, because no one else is.
So let's talk a little bit about what makes good dialogue and bad dialogue. I think one of the most important things you have to consider when writing dialogue is, would this come out of a human being's mouth? Like an adult human being's mouth?
I like sand.
Would you in your life have somebody say that?
I mean, if I'm writing Rain Man, I'm an excellent driver. Only on Sundays.
Maybe if you're writing a character that's high, because I can see somebody like really super high coming out with that line, going like, I like sand. Sand would solve the world's problems, man.
Right. I mean, if it's in character, I mean, I think Dustin Hoffman's Raymond character the dialogue was fantastic and brilliant. And but again, that's written by real writers and not like the pretend writers that we have in Hollywood today.
I would like to again bring up the point that those Star Wars movies were written in the 90s by writers who came up in the 70s and were still terrible.
not the
1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, but we're not talking about any of the. Oh, no, 1, 2, and 3, like the first one.
Every line of dialogue has been out of 1, 2, and 3.
When did those come out? I thought they came out in the 2000s.
The 90s.
Really?
Yes. You are blaming writers of today. Those movies came out 20 years ago.
Okay. It came out in 99, but yes.
20 years.
But in my defense, they were done by George Lucas, who is a horrible writer. He always was.
And he grew up in the 70s.
Yes,
so
but
the 70s did produce terrible writers.
Not everybody in the 70s was great writers. I mean, I can go through the litany of 1970s movies that were just awful.
My point.
But yeah, I'm shocked that it came. But I mean, that's so close. I was right. I thought it came out in the 2000s. So just the first one barely came out in the 90s, and then the rest of them came out
ago, though.
Yeah. Oh, and it's only gotten progressively worse. I mean, let's talk about rings of power. I hate saying that word because I want to use other words to describe that. But like, why do rocks sink and boats float?
We spoke about this line before we filmed it. And you agree with me that I can see what they were trying to do.
Right. Yeah. No, the boat metaphor actually works because boats should not float.
Yeah. The rocks part is the part that destroys that metaphor.
Yeah.
But the difference between that and the sand line is while the metaphor is wrecked, okay, it at least has some sort of attempt at being a metaphor. The sand line, as you say, is the wall holds up the roof. Like,
right. Yeah, no, they're definitely on different levels of horrible lines. Why does tar taste bad, but apples taste good? It's like, yeah, I don't think that works in a metaphor, dude. Like, it's tar tastes bad because it's tar.
I mean, Douglas Adams made it work. You know, the Vulcan ship drifted in the sky, exactly like bricks does.
But he didn't use tar and apples. Like,
well, he did use bricks in a spaceship.
But he painted a picture exactly. You know, it floated in the sky exactly the way bricks don't.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't say, "Why don't bricks float in the sky?"
Yeah. No,
like,
I understand.
They don't float in the sky, and neither should this thing.
There's a place, there's a time and a place, right?
Yeah, but again, I mean, that's a great example right there of, you know, why did the metaphor of a spaceship and a brick work so beautiful when a rock and a ship doesn't? And it's because there was no chance of the brick floating. In the metaphor with the rock and the boat, it's it's not that it's a rock, it's something else. And it's like, no, rocks just sink. Like, there's no, even if there was an ingenious rock out there one time, was like, man, all you guys look down at the dark water, I'm going to look up like those ships. It's still not going to float. Like, exactly. It's rock. Like, it's just the way it is.
What he should have, you know, a better metaphor would have been, why does a stone that is tied to a plank sink, but a stone that is in a boat not sink? Right, or something like that. Like, it's not a perfect metaphor.
I don't think the rock works at all. I was actually thinking about that, and I don't know if I could come up with one, but like a couple of things just rattled my head, you know, off the cuff, or something like, you know, why do fish swim under the water where boats only go above water, or something like that. I mean, there's ways to do it. Again, I don't know. I'd have to actually spend some brain power to figure out, or go a different direction. Like, there's a ton of different metaphors on why something fails but another thing succeeds, because that's really what the metaphor is.
What the picture they were trying to paint is like, think good thoughts, like think forward facing thoughts, don't look down into the abyss, because the abyss will want to drag you down. Which, let me tell you, like, I understood the metaphor because I have dived. I've done scuba diving, right? And in the Red Sea, there are these two pinnacles that stand like this, that you swim between, and it's about 30 meters down from the surface. But these two pinnacles stand up straight like that, and between them is a drop down of like hundreds of meters. Yeah, so you swim across these two pinnacles, and below you there's nothing but darkness. And that swim across was both one of the most eerie, wonderful, and terrifying experiences I've had in my entire life. Because you swim across there and you're like, something is going to reach up, like Cthulhu is in these depths. And at the same time, like, there is a pull to go down there and to see what's down there. And like, it tugs at you. So I got where the metaphor was going, but man, was it poorly executed.
Yeah. And again, that's taking a step back. And we talk about this in what you're trying to accomplish with a scene, what you're trying to accomplish with a piece of whatever. So it's the same thing with a piece of dialogue. Take a step back and go, okay, what am I trying to accomplish here? I'm trying to accomplish a metaphor that will paint the picture of, if you look back, if you just dwell on the mistakes that you've made and you don't look forward, those mistakes will drag you down and you will never come out of it. I mean, that's what they're trying to paint. Okay, great. Does a rock work for that? Probably not. Let's look at something. Does a ship work for that? Maybe not also, because it doesn't matter. You don't have to use the ship. Now, somebody might say, if I, with in retort to that, well, but it was about later in the show where she jumps off the ship and okay, great. Then, maybe this isn't the right time to try to do a call forward to that, some foreshadowing to that. Maybe you look for a different scene that foreshadows the ship and the decision that she makes there. So yeah, no, but also I think you could use a metaphor. If all you're trying to do is foreshadow the decision that she makes on the ship, then it doesn't have to be a metaphor with a ship. It just has to be a stronger, better metaphor about making the decision, and then it will still tie into it, even though she jumps off a ship.
So for me, good dialogue has to be something that would come out of a person's mouth. But it also has to convey something that the reader should understand. The only reason to write small talk is because you actually are writing small talk either as a subtext conversation, so it looks like small talk, but it's not, or you're writing small talk to show that the character is incompetent at it. So you're showing how awkward they are.
So I do want to put a caveat on this, because I've said that line, I've heard it said a million times. And I just realized when you were saying just now, I realized that we are all wrong in how we're saying this, because I think people could misunderstand. We're not talking about small talk as in, hey Marie, how you doing today? Oh, good. What's going? And then getting into it. Yeah. Because you do it has to be natural. You have to have some naturalness to your scenes. What we're talking about is an entire page and a half of them discussing, what the weather's going to be like tomorrow. Like, not even the line, weird weather we're having, huh? Or whatever. That's fine. So when we say no small talk, we are not talking about no small talk, because that would be very inorganic. What we're saying is it should be very limited to just what is needed to make the scene feel real.
Yes.
So, and like I said, I've said that line that you said, but for whatever reason, when you just said it right then, I was like, man, I wonder if there's somebody out there who's gonna be like, well, I can never say a greeting again. And it's like,
okay, you people still have to say hello to each other, because it has to come out of a human's mouth. Right. Or at least you have to say, like, they said hello or whatever, like something.
Yeah. It needs to be organic and it needs to feel real. It just needs to get into something of substance sooner rather than later. But you're going to have some, small talk, if you want to call it like that. But we're talking about, you're at work and you take your lunch break late and you're in the break room alone, and this one guy or girl that you really don't like also happen to take their lunch break. So now they're sitting in the same room with you and neither one of you really like each other, but you're going to talk for an hour. Don't write that. Like, that's not like a scene that I want to read, because they're just going to talk about nothing. Yeah. And so that's what we're talking about. Don't write a scene of it.
Sure. It's important to kind of like make the scene feel natural, but it is also important that your dialogue conveys information the reader needs.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like the reason why I thought of this was the opening of our dairy scene, where he walks down and what his first line in the kitchen is, morning mom isms. And then they greet him back and all that. But then he reaches for a tray of meat and a spoon almost takes his hand off, and he's, and then he's instantly in this, very sexually tension-filled argument with this young redheaded girl. And they're really just talking about him spanking her, and like, it's, she's feigning indignancy, but of course, she's thinking, I'd love for you to spank me. Like, there's all that going on, but it's instant. So we still have our small talk in the beginning, but then, and it's the same thing when they go out after the brother comes down and they go out into the dining hall, they greet their sister, they have a little bit, but then instantly, her and the, it's not his brother, it's his cousin, but her and his cousin are just right at each other's throat, and he has to deal with that. And so there's that tension between the two of them that, like it's a sibling fight. And what that does is it really grows the scene to, wow, okay, this is a real family. They live in a real place. They've been here for a really long time. This is all. And even though technically, even like the argument where, it's like, how dare you tell everyone in public, or how dare you tell me that I liked the boy when he didn't really like me, and then I made a fool of myself in public when I told him I liked him. Like, this prank, and that prank really doesn't have much, but still, it's something that for me, the reason why it's in there is because it really does make Arderi feel like he is living in a real home with real family and real, stuff that's going on. But it also, what does that scene do for the character? It shows that even though Arderi is young, he's 17, he also is somebody who can take control of his own age group, where he can step in as the boss and go, all right, that's it. You're not fighting anymore. You apologize. No, you apologize. And so he takes control of it. And that shows, because then when he's with the adults, he's a 17-year-old. He's a, mother may I, and, I'm, whatever. And they treat him like a child and all of that. So it shows that dichotomy of his life just in this one chapter, because in the next scene, he's with the adults. So, again, there's more to that scene than just small talk. So again, the subtext, the growing of the characters, the world building, all of that stuff is taking place, even though technically somebody, and that's why when you said that, I was thinking about that scene. And it's like, wow, there's actually just a lot of small talk in that scene, but it's so much more than that, and it does so much more than that with the story. It isn't, like my example of the two coworkers that don't like each other sitting and eating for an hour and they'll never see each other again. Like, there's definitely no impact on that. Or, I mean, I guess there could be, depending on how you write it, but I'm just saying, it's just a caveat. No small talk, 100% right. Don't write bull crap dialogue. But if you're doing something with it, if it actually has power and purpose, and you've done it, it's what I always say, on purpose by design. If you've done this for a reason and it actually works, and you set it out there to your beta readers and they're all like, oh yeah, this is a great scene, loved everything about it, then, which is what I got back from that scene, then you know that you are hitting on all cylinders, and your small talk, no one sees as small talk. They see it as what its purpose is. And in that scene, it's to grow the character and connect them to the reader and everything else. So, yeah.
So, yeah, and I think maybe that's the lesson one should take away from it. Put as much thought into your dialogue as you put into your prose.
Yes.
Just because it's coming out of a character's mouth doesn't mean it gets a pass from getting well thought out, and does it achieve its purpose?
And I'll add one thing to that. Everything that comes out of every character's mouth grows or paints a picture of that character. So, as an example, if they say something a little too whiny, but that's not you wrote it because it feels like that's what the character would say or whatever. But is the character whiny? I'm trying to think of an example from Magic Fall. There was a chapter that I just edited that you wrote, that this bird gets killed. And your reaction, the way you wrote Laron, was he literally pukes. Not, I mean, he doubles over and he's like, ah. And I'm like, but it wasn't very gruesome. And literally 15 minutes ago, he just watched 5 people get blown up in a small elevator, and parts and pieces went everywhere. And he didn't have that reaction to it. And so I toned it down a little bit in the editing. I just was like, okay, it's bad. It's a dead bird, but I just brought his reaction way down. Or we could have gone the other way and made the death of the bird incredibly gruesome. But I didn't want to do that. It wasn't a spot for that.
The death was more about the tree spitting fire.
Exactly. You were just trying to show the fact that the tree is dangerous. And that's why I was like, well, I'm not going to up the gruesomeness of the bird's death. This is not a place for that. So I just tagged down a little bit of the of his reaction. And I know that's not dialogue, but it's the thing that popped in my head that you could equate to it. So, I mean, I picked on us all the time in this. Here's, since we're doing the Star Wars thing, here's the perfect example of this. Luke Skywalker comes home from getting his magic sword. He sees his parents dead, crispy critters on his front lawn, and he's like, oh, let's go to a bar. And then the next day, he watches a guy that he met yesterday die, and he's like, no. Oh. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
Like, that seems a little
out of
outweighted on your reaction.
Yeah. So that, I mean, I completely agree. That is a little outweighted on the reaction.
I pick on that all the time, though.
I want to go back briefly to accents and say the world's most annoying accent has got to be Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah, everyone agrees on that.
Misa gonna stab you in the face. I swear. Ooh. And then again, when they talk to each other, they all talk like that. That is how they indicate the language. And I'm just like, I can't.
Yeah. No, that was, and everyone hates that. There's not a person alive that
I don't know which beta audience they ran that past that was like, yeah, no, this is fine, but it's terrible.
Which is, I think, why they started the rumors of, but Jar Jar Binks is actually a Sith Lord. I'm like, no, he isn't.
I don't care. He can be anything he likes with that accent. He's a dead man.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone hates that. Everyone hates Jar Jar.
Oh man, that was a bad accent.
It was a bad character.
It was a terrible character.
I mean, he was.
Although there was one good line from that movie. There's always a bigger fish was a great line. Like it
I thought you were going to say Mr. Horny. Oh, but that's from a song. That's not even from that movie.
No. I was going to say there's always a bigger fish because that was a good line.
Yes, that was a good line. It was very much on the nose, though, because they had literally just shown fish get eaten by a bigger fish, get eaten by a bigger fish. And I think they even got eaten by a bigger fish. I think there was like 3 or 4 in a row that was like yomp, yomp, yomp. And it's like, yeah, they did that in Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
Like that's
good. Again, like Lucas likes to be on the nose.
Well, but see, that one doesn't offend me because the line itself is terrible. There's always a bigger fish at that moment when we just saw that. What makes the line work is the fact that Anakin was freaking out and Obi-Wan is just like, there's always a bigger fish.
Yeah.
Like
it was Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, but yeah.
Oh, Qui-Gon, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was, like I said, I've gone through a lot of therapy to forget those first 3 movies. But you're right. It was Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. No. So Obi-Wan's freaking out and Qui-Gon is like, So it's the delivery that made that line not offensive. Because that line taken by itself is a lot like I don't like sand.
Yes.
Not as bad still, because I don't like sand is still like the winner of
on the nose.
Yeah. But because of how it was delivered, it's actually a comedic tension valve.
Yes.
So it takes that tension of that scene right out the door, which is, I mean, that's what it needs at that moment. That's why it's there.
Yeah. And for that purpose, it's good. For that purpose in that place, it's good. Right. The reason why I don't like sand doesn't work is because the tension's supposed to be ratcheting up, not down.
Right. Well, I mean, and the line sucks is why it doesn't work.
Yes,
but you're right. They're supposed to be rising the tension.
Yeah, but the tension should be going upwards, not sinking in that scene. And that's another thing to think about when you're doing your dialogue is where is the tension in your scene going? Because right before a battle, you can have a character give a speech. That's fine. Yeah. There have been some great literary speeches, like Henry V's speech put into his mouth by Shakespeare, because there's zero historical evidence that Henry V ever said those words. But the line Shakespeare wrote for him before the Battle of Agincourt was amazing. We band of brothers on this St. Crispin's Day, and you will tell your children about the deeds you did. And that whole speech is great. It inspired Churchill's speech. It inspired a whole bunch of people. All right, cool. But notice that he gave it before the battle, not in the battle, because you can't stand in the middle of a fight and declaim. Any dialogue in the middle of the action should be serving to ratchet up the tension of the action, not to give a freaking speech. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is good dialogue. And there's a lot of things, but we're running long in the tooth. you need to have subtext in your dialogue. You need to not say everything. So I literally just watched a video, and it happened to be this week, and it happened to be about dialogue. And unfortunately, I cannot remember the YouTuber that put this out, or I would give him credit. But he went through, he was also talking about Star Wars. I don't know if this was I don't even know if it's a new video. It just came up my feed, and I watched it for a few minutes. But he showed that scene that I was talking about with the Anakin, literally just saying spot on exactly what he feels and how he feels. And I never would have thought about this. So all credit to him, because it's been too long since I've seen the movie. But he used as his example of good dialogue the scene from Back to the Future where McFly is sitting with his girlfriend, and they're like on a roof of a car, and they're talking about that they're going to sneak away for the weekend and they're going to go bone. Like that's literally what they're talking about. They don't mention that at all.
Wow, chicky wow, wow.
But there's no one that watches that doesn't know, oh yeah, these are two teenagers that are lying to their parents so that they can go have sex.
Yeah.
Like there's no denying the subtext of that scene. But they never mention sex. They never, they kind of mention, they don't mention that they're lying straight up, but like she asked them, have you told your mom that we're going to the cabin this weekend? He's like, are you kidding? No. Like, so he doesn't say, oh no, I lied to her. I told her that I was going to be here, whatever. He's just like, and then he lets it because everyone knows, oh yeah, no, you're 16. You're not going to tell your parents you're going to a cabin with a girl. Like that's not happening. So, we've all been there. We've all done that. So it's subtext needs to be there. You don't need to say everything. You can get away with less. And I find myself doing that not only to your dialogue, but to my dialogue too when I'm in editing mode. Because when you're in stream of consciousness, you just write. And sometimes you write a little bit too much, or you write a little bit too, whatever. And so because I'm editing your stuff more than anything else right now, it's just top of mind. But I do the same thing with mine. I mean, one of my edit passes is just, I don't really need to say this last half of this piece of dialogue. It's implied. I can literally just trail it out, or I can have him say, like what do we say earlier, where he could have just said the conversation between the two guys, the two ambassadors, where it's like, you didn't tell our overlord this. He could have literally just said, nope.
No.
And everyone would go, yeah, because it'd be stupid to tell him that. Like, you can just do that through subtext, and you're not losing your audience. You don't need to say, no, because if I did, he would force choke. I mean, he didn't say that in the thing, but he might as well have. So, because there was no subtext in that.
I want to say something else as well on that point. Like every time I've seen dialogue that is so on the nose, that is so like he's going to do this, or the enemy's going to do this, or this. Every time I've seen dialogue that's so on the nose, it's because the enemy is never shown to be powerful. They always lose. So the writer is dependent on the reader or the listener or the viewer believing the words that come out of a character's mouth that tells them that the enemy is hardcore.
Right.
Because remember, what comes out of a character's mouth is literally telling. It is literally telling.
Or what they're about to do is dangerous, or that this thing is fearsome, or there's a lot of dialogue where they do that, and also a lot of narrative, but a lot of dialogue where they'll just tell each other. But then again, I mean, you showed me a trailer of a movie, Sisu, that I definitely want to watch. It's like a World War II John Wick. It's actually done by, I think, the director of John Wick. A lot of just death.
Shot in Finland. So if you want to see Finland.
But there is, so I guess, I didn't think about that until you just said that. I guess I should be embarrassed by what I said then at first when I was first watching it, because I watched it with you, basically watching me watch it, but you couldn't see it. But literally, when they showed the landscape and all that, I was like, oh, so this is obviously a post-apocalyptic world. And then you just said, if you want to see Finland, just watch that movie. And I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have called it apocalyptic.
Okay, Lapland does look a little post-apocalyptic.
That's what it looked like to me. Like, anyway, I just thought of that. So I just called your home country a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
You
Um,
should see it in winter when it's covered in a meter of snow. And then in
hmm.
spring when the snow melts and it's all dead under a meter.
That's
So
what because that's what it looked like. It looked like snow had just melted off of it. It was all mud and death,
it has.
and I was like,
It
wow,
has.
that's depressing.
So this is Finland, right? So there are 3 amazing months where it is green. The light lasts all day. We've got like 2 to 3 hours of darkness, and otherwise the sun is up. It's beautifully green. It's amazing. And those are the 3 months of summer. Then there's 6 months where it's under a meter of snow, and that's winter. Then there's a month and a half on either side where Finland is a mud bath, and that's spring and autumn. And that's my country.
But anyway, the line that I was getting to,
Yeah.
because it's a bad line up front,
Mm.
but I think it works with the end. I only saw it once before
Mm.
we started recording, so I might butcher it a little bit. But somebody says something like, people say he's immortal. Do you think he's immortal? And that line right there is a little, heavy-handed, but the retort to it, I did really like, and I think it works with that, where she says, no, I just think that he's too stubborn to die or something
He
like that.
refuses to die. Yeah.
I think he just refuses to die or something like that, whatever it was. So it was a good retort to a bad line. And so like those, I think, work really well, because then you can have a character that maybe is not known for his great lines, that'll say some stupid things that maybe readers might be thinking, and then let somebody else come back with something that's kind of a cool retort to it or whatever.
Yeah, it also works in the movie. Since I've seen the movie, it also works in the movie, in the context of the movie, because you have at this point seen this dude do, go
John
through.
Wick
I
level
mean,
stuff.
it's John Wick level stuff. It's
Yeah.
absurd. You know what I mean? Like,
But that's the thing.
It's
I mean,
amazing.
again, it's about expectations. So
Yeah.
if you walk into that knowing what you're going to get, then you're going to love what you get, because that's what you want. I think it's the reason. So one of my favorite, and I've talked about this before, one of my favorite Bruce Willis movies is Hudson Hawk. I love that movie. I've watched it 50 times at least. I don't know if I've watched any other movie more than Hudson Hawk.
Yeah.
And it is fantastic. And it's like the fifth, well, now it would be, but back in the 90s, it was like the fifth most money losing movie of all times. And it was just panned. And it's because it came out right after Die Hard. And they advertise it. When you look at the trailer for it, it looks like Die Hard. It's serious, and it looks like it has a lot of action and the pithy one-liners and everything like that. It isn't that movie. Like, it is a tongue-in-cheek, farcical fairy tale. They sing songs while they're robbing a museum and riding skateboards. I mean, it's not a serious movie. And so because of the expectations of people going into it is what ruined that movie for everybody. But if you want to, watch a hilarious movie that is just really so well put together, and so fun, it's just a fun ride, then it's a fantastic movie, as long as you go into it with right expectations.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that is like Sisu. I was a blast. I loved it, but I knew, like, the trailer told me what I was getting into here.
Right. Well, and again, that's where they failed with Firefly. They advertised it wrong. I remember watching the ads for advertising, and it looked like a teenage angst, crappily shot television show. And I'm like, that's not for me. And so everybody who was like, ooh, another teenage angst thing, that's exactly for me. They showed up, they hated it. I never showed up. So I never loved it, because, I didn't find it until after it was canceled. And then I watched it on DVD, years later. So, like so many other Firefly fans. So yeah, marketing matters. But anyway, getting back to dialogue, it is as important. I love what you said earlier about your dialogue is just as important as your narration. There's a reason why my dialogue class is dialogue. It's not people talking to each other, because it has to do more than that. It has to move the plot. It has to grow the characters. It has to, actually have tension, or, whatever the tone of that moment is. It has to deliver upon that. And so it's hard. I think dialogue is the hardest thing in the world to write. I do. I think it is very difficult. Unless you just don't care, and then you can just write, I don't like sand. Yeah. And then make millions of dollars making a movie that everyone picks on you about.
To be fair, I don't think that Lucas would have been good at writing prose either.
No.
So, so I don't like, I will pick on him for his dialogue, but I don't think it's only his dialogue.
No. No. Now, I mean, most people that are coming from, I mean, one of my private clients right now is a Hollywood guy. And some of the scripts that he never sold, now that he's kind of out of the business, he wants to translate those over into prose. And so he's doing great and really, you know, coming at it with this attitude. But then you read like Kirkman's novels that he wrote for The Walking Dead, and you're just like, yeah, no, you should have stuck to scripts because this is bad prose. This is terrible.
I do want to close with a thought that I had about dialogue and Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote plays. Essentially, almost the entirety of the story is communicated via dialogue. What's more, it's communicated via dialogue that's mostly written in freaking rhyme. And yet he managed to effectively communicate in a way that still speaks to us today about the plot, the characters moving forward, the advancement, the advancement of the theme, like all of those things, just in his dialogue. So if you can get past the English, which I grant you is fairly highfalutin and with a lot of like new words because he made up a ton of them, then, you know, if you're struggling with dialogue, look at how he did it.
And was the oldest known writer of a Yo Mama joke.
Yeah, that's true. The first Yo Mama reference.
Yeah, he was ahead of his time.
Man,
but I mean,
that dude would have loved movies. You know how much that dude would have loved movies? You would have loved them.
Yeah. That's another line from the Hudson Hawk, although I'll bastardize it because he said Da Vinci. But if Shakespeare were alive today, he would be sitting with me in the back of my limo naked, eating sushi and watching movies. Yeah. So
he was also the first, is also the first very clear reference we have to absolute propaganda in writing. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
So Richard III was not anywhere near as bad as Shakespeare made him, but Elizabeth was Shakespeare's patron, and her ancestors had beaten Richard's ancestors. So,
yep.
So Richard turned into the villain of all villains, the evil hunchback.
Yeah. So anyway, did you have a point on Shakespeare, or just the fact that it's really good?
Just go look at if you can read his dialogue. Look at what Shakespeare achieves with dialogue. It is worth looking at.
What I was going to add to that was, and I do this in my dialogue class. Even if you're not planning on writing scripts or comic scripts or video game scripts, which I write all three, if you really want to learn how to push your prose dialogue further than it's ever been pushed before, write a movie script. Because again, just like you were saying with Shakespeare, you have to tell the entire story through dialogue. You have to allow the readers to understand the depth of every character through only dialogue. You have to be able to set the scene and the emotion and the tone and the style and everything else, as well as the thematic elements, through nothing but dialogue. And so if you really want to push yourself, it's one of the reasons why, and I've said this before on this podcast, one of my drafts, when I'm editing, my macro I run, it will literally highlight just the dialogue, and then I will do a draft where I skip all the narration because it's not highlighted, and I just read the dialogue. And I'm asking myself, does this piece of dialogue do what it needs to do? Does it give depth to this character? Does it add something to the story? Does it push the plot? Does it do anything for the thematic elements of the story? Do I understand the scene without reading any of the narration? Now, can some chapters, like if it's an all action fight scene and no one says a single word, then obviously dialogue can't do anything for you. But most chapters are much more dialogue heavy than that. And so that's one of my drafts. I just run dialogue, and I want to see if the dialogue can do what it needs to do. And that includes inner monologue. I do, inner monologue, in my opinion, is dialogue as well. And since I do use inner monologue 2, 3, 4 times every single page, because I'm a very heavy inner monologue, we were talking about Dune before we started recording. And I had made you were talking about how you liked the new version of it. And I thought it was good. I thought it was thin is what I'll say. And the reason why I felt that it was thin is because Herbert was a very introvert, his character was a very introverted character and always looking internally. And so when they made the first adaptations of it, they let Paul Atreides, I thought that was a brilliant move of theirs. They gave him a monologue, a voiceover. And normally that ruins movies, or a lot of times it ruins movies. It actually really enhanced Dune. And in this new version, the latest version, the director chose to use none of it. He didn't want to use that. And I think that was to his detriment. I think it makes the story thin because so much of the story is organically told through Paul Atreides' inner monologue that cutting that was a big mistake for him. And the story, I think, suffers because of it, because you don't get that internal discussion of him thinking about stuff and him, actually having discussions about these very complex world building things and topics and everything else, relationships between people. I think it worked really, really well, both in the novel and in the original Dune adaptation, whereas this movie was way better looking, and also bigger in scale and everything else. And I do like some of the story changes that they made in this. I think they worked really well, but I think that what makes it feel thin and what makes it not as good as it could have been was their decision to use no inner monologue.
So I'm still I'm in two minds as to whether I prefer the mini series. You remember the mini series, the couple of movies, like I think it's 3 2-hour episodes, something like that the BBC made.
There's been 3, I get them confused. There's the original movies that were back in the 90s or
in
80s.
The 80s, I think.
Yeah, it might even been in the 80s.
And they were not so great.
They weren't, but they were. I mean, they had like Sting was in it. I love that Sting was in it. There was some really good stuff about it, and it was a honest adaptation of the novels. It stuck really close to the story. They didn't take any liberties, which that was their downfall because of the fact that it is such a massive story that you cannot tell it well in 90 minutes. So it's not that the story was the movie was bad. It's that they couldn't get to everything and they didn't want to skip the major moments. And so therefore that's really its downfall.
That movie didn't really work for me, but I did laugh. So sometimes that's good enough.
And that's Patrick Stewart, isn't that right? He played
so
isn't he the fighter dude that Jason Momoa plays in the new movie?
It's possible. But then there's a later adaptation which is done as like those mini series.
And I don't remember that one. And I think I
like that one. I do like that one because I think they took 6 hours, which gave them real scope to really, delve into it.
And I know I saw it, but for some reason I'm just not pulling it up.
That was good. But I will reserve judgment on which version I prefer once I've seen the second Villeneuve one.
Right.
Because that really, I mean, the first Villeneuve one is great, but it stops in the middle of the book.
Right. That is actually the only thing that pissed me off about that first movie. Like I said, it was good. Yeah. It was thin, could have been better, but it was good. The thing that pissed me off was finding out that they dropped half a movie and they had no idea if they were going to get greenlit for the second half. That, in my opinion, was like, as the movie maker, you should have gone to them and said, no, I'm not doing this unless you give me green light for both. Why would I do half a movie? I'm not going to do that to my fans. I'm not going to do that to the audience. It's not good for you because, if it's just, no, that's going to hurt people. People are not going to watch it because they know it's only half a story. Like, I would have fought for that.
But yeah, so I will reserve judgment on Dune until I've seen the second one. But I did like the first one. I did think it was good.
Yeah.
The first movie.
Yeah.
And I think, like, with something like Dune, it does make sense to split it into at least two pieces just for the size.
Oh yeah, it needs to be.
You know, it needs
If you can make Hobbit into 3 movies,
that should have been one movie.
agreed.
Oh man, that was so bad as well. It also had some choice dialogue. Not even Martin Freeman could rescue some of those lines. So I think we've more or less covered it. There's a great line of dialogue actually from Dune the movie. Dreams make good stories, but everything important happens when we're awake. Which I think is a line that prose writers should take to heart and stop writing dreams.
Depends. They can work.
They can, but not to open with. We'll see. I know you do it once. We'll see.
I do it once, and I think it works really well. But that's a movie, and movies are different. It's a different medium. Although you guys can read that if you want. It is available. Nurse, a magical fairy tale. You can actually read it's not really a movie script. I left it in script format, but I added like 50 pages to make it actually entertaining to read. But it is available on Amazon. Just search for Nurse, a magical fairy tale. I actually sent that out last week or the week before that. I sent it out twice. It got requested twice by studios. So it's coming back on the radar, hopefully. So we'll see if that actually gets made.
Nice. Would be fun to see it.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think that is a good place to end this episode. I hope that you've enjoyed our rambling chat about good dialogue, bad dialogue, and I hope that you will write better dialogue. And we will see you soon for another one.
Bye.